So I'm expecting that everyone is able to hear my voice. I'm not able to hear some of you. So maybe you are not connected to audio, or I don't know. So just to make sure my screen is working, can you confirm that the screen changes?
Hi, this is Mark.
Yes.
I was muted. I'm back.
Hi, Mark. It's nice to
Hi.
hear your voice.
I
You
can
guys
see
too.
your screen change there, Pankaj. Looks fine.
Yeah, this is John. I can see it too.
Anthony is saying my audio is very low. So is it better now?
Yeah, that improved.
Yeah,
Okay,
much.
Great. So welcome to 12th video community of practice meeting. I'm Pankaj Agrawal, founder of Next Software Solutions and working group leader of this community of practice. So I don't think anyone is new here, so I'll get started. There are a few things that we were discussing last time. One key thing was how tightly we would want to integrate with CMI5, and it was related to few verbs. So one thing was about, let's see, yeah. One thing was about the terminated and abundant verb. Should we use them or should we use one of them? The difference between terminated and abundant, as per my understanding related to CMI5, is that terminated is sent by the content or the wrapper around the content when the content is terminated or ended due to any reason. So if the content is able to send an information that the session or the activity has ended, it would send a terminated verb. If it is not able to send this information to the LRS for some or any reason, the LRS or the LMS would send an abundant verb when it is able to do so. So terminated is in the hands of the content or the wrapper around the content, while the abundant is in the hands of LMS or the LRS. So should we use terminated and remove the requirement of abundant and leave it to the developers if they need it, or what would be the best way to handle these two verbs?
Hey, Pankaj, this is Jason. So,
yeah,
the concern before was that it would cause some problems with the CMI5 profile, possibly because they have a specific rules for sequence of events for launching CMI5 activities, and that was the concern, that it would trigger some unanticipated or unintended action if you used initialized and terminated within an embedded video. Let's say you wanted to use the video within a CMI5 course or whatnot, that it would cause a conflict.
There are two scenarios. One is when the activity ID of the CMI5 content itself, or what you call AU, is same as the video's activity ID. So that is one scenario when both IDs are same. In this case, if it is same, it should follow everything that CMI5 says. Currently, CMI5 requires these terminated and initialized verbs, so I don't see any conflict there. But it would need a better understanding of CMI5, and someone who understands CMI5 better might be able to confirm if this can be done or not. While there is another scenario where video is part of a CMI5 content. So it is not the AU itself, and the activity ID is different from the CMI5 AU's activity ID. So in that case, when the activity ID is different, it would not create any conflict because the activity ID is different. So it doesn't. Earlier there was a requirement that nothing can send the same initialized or terminated verbs, but after some changes, it was decided that anything inside the activity can send the same verbs as long as the activity ID is different and it is sending for its own sake.
Oh, okay, okay. I think I missed that last discussion.
Yeah, it was, I think, a couple of months back, I guess. And I checked their documents, and it seems that there are certain requirements that specific extra metadata that CMI5 sends should not be included in the extra verbs or extra data that is sent. So that should not be a problem. It is up to the implementers how they integrate, but it will not create, it will definitely not create a conflict if the activity ID is different. And
Okay.
even if it is same, my understanding so far about CMI5 says that it will not create a conflict.
Okay. So I'm sorry. What's the question then? I guess I missed maybe some of the previous discussions. What is the question then that you're asking, whether or not to use those verbs in terms of semantics and their existing IDs, or since it won't cause a conflict, what's the concern?
Yeah, so there are two things. One is about these two verbs, terminated and abundant. Um, uh, it is not necessarily that it'll create a conflict, but initially, as we discussed with Bill and others about these verbs, it seemed that we should include it. But as per the last meeting we had, I think you were there and Anthony was there. Um, we were of a feeling that some of these could be removed and left to the user. Uh, for example, the abundant verb. So as per CMI5's definition, abundant is sent by the LMS or the LRS if there is nothing to determine if the activity was ended. And if terminated is sent, it is sent by the content or the wrapper around the content when the activity is ended. So let's say if a user clicks on exit button, it would send a terminated statement. Or if a user closes the window and that is the wrapper is able to capture that activity, it can send a terminated statement that this session has terminated. So I feel that terminated can be sent by the wrapper when the video ends, or when the video is closed, or when the page is closed, or whatever is feasible for the video wrapper. But abundant is up to the LMS or the LRS. So the question is whether we should have these two verbs, or whether we should have terminated and remove abundant and leave it to the implementers.
I don't know if I have a solid suggestion, but since not everybody's using CMI5 quite yet, I guess I would lean towards having both verbs? I think that's the question you're asking, if we just have terminated or if we have terminated and abandoned. And I guess it would make sense to me to have them both as part of the verbs for the video. Is that what you're asking, I think?
Yeah, that was the question. But the thing is, if someone is not using CMI5 and video is part of a separate app, or video is part of a separate HTML page which is not actively managed by an LMS, in that case, abandoned might be something that that the LMS cannot send because there is no LMS. So either the LRS should be active, which by definition is not an active component. So in that kind of situation, it would not be possible for whatever mechanism that is launching the content to be able to send the abandoned verb. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I'm trying to, I guess, understand why it's a problem if it can't send the abandoned verb anyways. Then including it in our description for the COP wouldn't really make a difference one way or the other, right?
If we say that it should send abandoned verb, and if the
You're saying people will
LMS,
have to go on. Yeah, go ahead.
if they're using a video outside LMS and it is not able to send abandoned verb, then that verb will not be available. So it would not meet the requirements. Or we can say that abandoned may or may not be. So we can either make it optional that abandoned may be sent by the LMS if it is used on an LMS, or LRS if the LRS is capable to do that. So either we'll need to make it optional, or we need to remove it and leave it to people who are implementing it.
This is Patrick. I know in the CMI group, having a terminated statement is important to know that the session is closed off, but there's not been a requirement anywhere else for having a terminated. So I'm just thinking from a reporting standpoint, I don't know that I would report on something that was terminated. I would just be more interested in, what people started with and report on that, even though they might have not have gone through 100% completion. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't feel strongly about it either way.
This is Anthony. I can definitely see the value in an abandoned statement. The two that come to mind are, if I'm tracking learning, the example that I use very often when I lecture is I want to pivot the interactions that I'm gathering on the video against test questions that are answered in that video. Did the people who answered those questions incorrectly watch the video? So if I know they abandoned halfway through, that's important information. The other is for marketing or anything like of that nature. If people are not watching the video, then that video is of no use. So we definitely want to know if they're abandoning it. Where I'm concerned though is, again, there's more to a verb than just the verb itself. There's also the activity to which it is linked. So if I abandoning the video is very different from abandoning the class. So I'm not sure. I just don't understand the collision concern with CMI5 here.
There's not necessarily any collision. It is about the decision whether we need these two verbs. Now, when you are talking about a user abandoning a video, there are two ways to abandon it. One is to uh, click on an exit button, and the other one is when, let's say, you just switch off your computer. Now, the two situations are different. That you are telling the content that I'm closing it, whether it is in the midway or at the end. If you are telling the content, or if the content is able to determine that you have closed the tab, it can send a terminated verb. So in that case, the abandoned is terminated verb. It is not an abandoned verb. The other situation where, let's say, you switch off your computer directly from power, the content will not be able to send that information to the LRS. So in this case, the LRS doesn't know when you actually ended your session. In that case, the LRS or the LMS will have to actively look for something else, or decide after, let's say, 1 hour that this user is not there. So I'll send an abandoned verb. So the decision is not made by the user, it is made by the LMS or the LRS, whether it is abandoned. So abandoned in case of these verbs is that this
It's not going to be made by either of those. It'll be made by the content.
no. If you read the CMI5 description of these two verbs, abandoned is when the content is not able to determine if the user has ended. So it is a passive decision, or a decision made by the LMS or the LRS, whether, let's say, if you start some other content, then it will say that this user is doing something else, so this session has ended, and it will send an abandoned verb. So that is the way abandoned is decided. It is not from the video itself or the video wrapper itself. Or in case of CMI5, it is not sent by the CMI5 wrapper or the CMI5 content itself. So the content, if content is sending something, it will send terminated. It will not send abandoned verb.
So an example of that would be, let's say they closed a browser window inadvertently, and it killed the activity, killed the session, and maybe the last thing they did was interacting with the video, and so because it wasn't followed by a terminated, they would have gotten an abandoned as maybe the last verb that was sent.
Yeah.
Or they lost power or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So who is sending that signal though? If I just stop sending a signal, the LRS has no way of knowing if I close the window. It just knows it hasn't heard from me in a set amount of time.
Yeah, so CMI5 lets the LMS decide. It can decide based on user doing something else. So let's say some other CMI5 activity is started. So LMS can decide that if some other CMI5 activity is started by the user, the previous activity has to end, and the LMS will check if a terminated verb was sent for the last activity, and it will send an abandoned. So that is one active way that the LMS can decide and send the abandoned verb if the terminated was not sent. The other way could be that it is a long time, let's say a few hours, and it is up to the LMS.
All right, so that's okay. So that's at the content level, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking at the elemental level. So kind of getting back to the collision. So we could use an abandoned verb, and the LMS or the LRS, whether it's attached to an LMS or not, would accept that abandoned verb and store it as abandoned. CMI5 is not going to get in the way of that.
We can send, technically we can define it that the content will be sending, but I would not want to do something I would not want to define a verb in a different way than it is being used in other place. Because CMI5 uses terminated for the same thing. So we would want to use terminated in that case.
I don't know. It still seems okay to me. I mean, the only distinction I'm looking at the CMI5 verb here for abandon is that would be a conflict, I think, is that it says the LMS uses will send the abandoned statement or looks at the terminated statement. So the only issue here is if they're not using an LMS, it's just this element living somewhere. There's still other means of identifying, even if there isn't a learning management system there, whether or not a user is still logged in and interacting with the content in some way. So, like I said, I'd say leave it in here. If you want to make it optional, it's fine. I guess I don't really see a huge problem with the conflict.
Yeah, because again, remember, the content's not going to say you abandoned the course. It's going to say you abandoned the video.
Yeah. But the content, if the content is saying it, I feel it should say terminated, because that is the way CMI5 explains it.
See, I guess I would disagree with that, because to me, termination is much more final than abandon. And maybe this is a cultural thing, in the use of the verb that I just need to get over. That's entirely possible. To me, if I terminate the video, that means I stopped. To terminate the video, I took an intentional action to cease or halt the video. Whereas if I abandon it, I walk away from it. Those are two different things.
Yeah, so if the user is doing something that terminates or ends or any way that the content or the video wrapper is able to determine, it sends the terminated verb. Both would mean the same thing, that the session has ended at this point and nothing else related to this session would be
entertained. We're not talking about a session. We're talking about an element.
Yeah, so even if it is about an element that is a video, when I say session in respect to video, it is the session for that video. So if you send
careful. The word session does not refer to an element within a course. The session refers to, the course. So we have to be very careful how we say that.
So what do you call if it is about a video?
Well, it's going to depend on if the video is an element within the course, then you're talking about the video.
Yeah, I'm talking about the video, but what word would you use instead of session?
I would use the word video.
But video is video.
If you're interacting with the element within the scopes of the SCORM xAPI nomenclature, that interacting with an element would not be a session. So in this case, it's nothing. It's just you're interacting with the element, which is a part of a course. The session refers to the course itself. Although, yes, I'm fully aware that technically speaking, the session refers to the open socket communication, time and take, blah, blah, blah. I don't really want to get into all that.
Yeah, session is used in many different ways. But when we are talking about session in context of CMI5, it is the time when the user starts a content.
But CMI5 is at the course level, not the element level.
CMI5 is at AU level, right?
This is so a video is more likely to be an element that is part of an AU, not an AU itself.
Yeah. So
speak up.
Okay. So when CMI5 talks of a session, it is a CMI5 session ID, and it starts when the content starts, or the course or AU, whatever you want to call it. So whenever the course or AU starts, that is the time when it starts. And when a terminated or abundant verb is sent, that is when the session ends. So that is the CMI5 course session. But let's say a CMI5 is content is on an LMS. That is the case. CMI5 is for an LMS. So if you are going and logging into a LMS, a PHP or whatever login session starts, and that is the login session. When you start, there is a login session, and the login session ends when you log out of that LMS. You might have attempted multiple CMI5 content during that one login attempt. So in a login session, you can have multiple CMI5 sessions. Similarly, as per my understanding, in a CMI5 session, you can have multiple video sessions. If you can get a better word instead of session, that is fine. But so far, I'm able to get this word session.
I guess my concern is we seem to be spending way too much time talking about CMI5 and not video. CMI5 is at the AU level. We're looking at video, which is at the elemental level that CMI5 doesn't cover.
Yeah. So let's say we want an ID for the video session. Now you cannot say that video cannot have a session and CMI5 content can have. When I start, yeah.
I mean, so at this point, we're just using the word session to refer to any time we communicate with it, anytime we look at anything, which I think is going to lead to more confusion later on. So I'm not sure I agree with the interpretation of the word session, but if I don't know, maybe am I alone in this? Is anyone else kind of, how does everybody else feel about this?
I get what you're saying about session. I think the conversation, kind of like you're saying, is sort of getting away from the point of what we're trying to get to here for the video COP. I think we're looking a little too strictly at what CMI5 is doing specifically with its verbs. I think if you just go back to the original discussion about the difference between abandoned and terminated being intention from the learner's perspective of whether they close it intentionally or something happened and they were forced to abandon or they did abandon it somehow. If we look at that more abstract definition, what CMI5 is doing is just looking at it within the context of what they're trying to describe. And that's why they say an LMS, because that's their context for CMI5. For us, we're at this element level. And regardless of where it's happening that this person terminates or abandons, we still need to know that because it's important when we're looking at the actual interaction with it, the learning portion of it. So I think abandoned and terminated should still live there. I don't think we're conflicting with CMI5's definition, except for in that the context of the verb is different, but the meaning of the verb is ultimately still the same. It's intentionality there.
And I would also point out, you can abandon the element of a course without abandoning the course.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with those points.
This is Patrick. So how does that kind of work in practice? So like a close button or whatever would be ending the session versus some kind of unload event that's triggering the abandon statement to be initiated. Because that's kind of the other problem is that, if the user disappears or disconnects or something, there's nothing to trigger that event.
I mean, that's how I would interpret it. If I click close, that would be terminate versus I just go away would be abandon.
But who sends that verb? if I go away?
Well, if I just go away, there is no verb being sent, so that would either be the province of, an LRS that just decides, hey, I haven't heard anything, so I'm going to insert this, or if it's an LMS. But even that, I'm still struggling with what the LMS would be doing, because the LRS is the one you're not talking to an LMS, you're talking to the LRS. The LMS isn't going to know if you're talking to the LRS or not.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I
I'm also not.
So that
Yeah,
statement in
I'm
the CMI spec that the LMS is going to send to the abandoned statement, I have some very serious issues with that. But that's a different discussion for another day. Don't get me wrong.
So this is how CMI5 has explained. So I'm not sure how they have decided to do it, and that is why I'm concerned whether we should include abundant or not, because there will be situations where we'll not have an LMS with videos. So a video may be on a simple HTML5 or HTML page without an LMS, and we would want to be able to work with that. And abundant verb might not be feasible in that scenario. So either we use the same definition as CMI5 and make it optional for videos, or we just remove it.
I would say keep it and make it optional.
That's my vote too. Optional would be good.
I think that is good, because it's going to vary depending on the type of video. If you tap into YouTube's API or player, maybe, they have a clean way for you to detect whether someone abandoned the video. And, if you use other players or other forms of tracking a video, you may not have that same luxury. So, yeah, definitely should be probably an optional thing.
Okay, great. So coming back to the session thing, what I feel we need some ID to determine a specific whatever you call an attempt or a session or a sitting, when a video starts and when it is terminated or abandoned. So all those statements should be bound by a common ID. Should we call a video session ID, or should we call?
Well, wouldn't that be the name of the video?
The name or the ID of the video will always be there. So let's say I start a video today and terminate it in the middle. I come back tomorrow and I start it again and I complete it. Now there are two different sessions that happened. One is today and one is tomorrow. Now these two different sessions should have some identifier. Should we call it a session ID, video session ID, or should we call it something else? An attempt ID or sitting ID or whatever.
Have you guys had any discussion on how to track attempts? Because that is a kind of a good metric to know, and you're talking about correlating to like performance and on other things, the number of times they watch the video.
The number of times can be done by counting the number of initialized verbs for the specific video. So that is one possible way to identify the number of attempts. But what a user did in a specific attempt, it would be best if we have a session ID.
So the two things I would say, I've never even considered that. I just go by initialized. If we are going to have any kind of a session ID, I would make that optional.
Yeah, we just talked at length about this in the CMI meeting a couple weeks ago, and there was lots of interesting things that came from it, but at the end it was rather large in scope potentially, and so we decided to punt and just make it an optional thing. You can sometimes get the session ID directly from the LMS, and you could use that, but whether or not the content has some unique identifier and or session, timestamp code or whatever within it was kind of a big thing that we weren't ready to tackle at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my concern is if you are looking at the last thing you want to have is multiple overlapping session IDs at different layers. So for example, if I load the course, okay, or I launch the course, okay, there's a session for that. And then I initialize the video, okay, now there's a session for that. If I reload the page, is that a different video session than the one before? Do I use the same session that the course is using? And if there is no standard for what that session is, then can I still use it for the video? I agree. I think that's a huge scope.
In the xAPI spec, it does say that an ID will be generated from the LRS if it receives one without an ID, and otherwise an ID should be generated from the activity provider. So there's definitely merit with having some type of session or activity ID.
There are a few different things. One is about the statement ID that you said. If it is not generated by the content, it will be generated by the LRS. So it is for the specific statement, and all statement will have separate IDs. Regarding the CMI5 thing, CMI5 is completely based on LMS. So LMS will decide what the session ID will be, and that will be sent to the LRS, and the content can get it from the LRS. So that is how it works with the CMI5. But in case of video, we are not dependent on the LMS, and we can have an independent ID which can be generated by the content itself. So it could use the same UUID function to generate a session ID, or use some other function which we decide. And it can be a random number that lasts for that session. So session in this case means after a video is loaded, whatever happens in that specific attempt. If it is reloaded, it will generate a new ID.
As part of our conversation a couple of weeks ago, one of the rabbit holes we kind of went down, and I don't suggest we do this here or anything, but having some type of session ID based on like a GUID was an interesting idea, whereas different components of the GUID would represent different things. Like, for instance, one part could be a vendor ID, one part could be the actual unique identifier for that particular piece of content, and another piece could be a date timestamp, for instance. And so it kind of lets you reuse and track content globally. That's probably outside the scope of this, though. And the only reason I bring that up is because in our own internal LCMS that we use, that's how we track things as well. There's a global identifier within there for each piece of content, and so potentially we could track each piece based on that GUID. So it's not a bad way to go, but I'm not sure it should be required here at all.
Yeah, I can definitely see the value in this. We're doing similar things, which is sort of with testing, just to content experiences, so we know when they go back after the initial view of the content what they're looking at. Hopefully to identify maybe things that we wouldn't explain well. But what we've just been doing is, I don't know if this is supposed to be accepted practice or what, it's just what we've been taking is, in this example, when they initialize or play the video, we just take back the UUID from the statement that's generated, and we're just parenting all statements that result from this specific instance of playing or interacting or whatever with the content to the initial statement that was generated, because it's pretty much the only time we ever want to look at it is in reflection to a very specific instance of when they're going back to look at the content. So that's what we're doing. I don't know if it makes sense to have a whole separate thing, but my understanding is the parent and context activities is one way of generating this relationship. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you mean using the parent ID as?
Yeah, so we get the ID that's kicked back from the statement that's initially sent related to that element, whatever that element is, in this case a video. And then we use the UUID in the parent portion of context activities for all subsequent interactions that are related to that object. So if they pause it, for instance, then we would parent that statement to the initialization statement of the video, for example.
But in that case, there will be one issue that if there is already a parent, how would we determine which of those parents is the session ID?
We just make sure we have a clear taxonomy. So they would never have another parent. They're always parented to that video, and the video is parented to some other higher level content object, depending on where it is in the overall instructional process. We just ensure we have a clear taxonomy, so that's never a problem. It just does require a little bit of planning ahead of time.
Currently, in general, any statements that is sent as a part of an activity will have a parent ID that is equal to the activity ID of the parent. So in case of these video statements, the initialized, played, paused, whatever it is, all those statements will generally have a parent ID which is same as the activity ID of the video itself. So the video itself will have an activity ID, and sorry.
So I think that's the same thing I'm saying. Maybe not, but it sounds like the same thing.
No. Probably I'm wrong. So yeah. So parent ID will be the parent of that video. So let's say if it is part of a CMI5 activity, the CMI5 AU will be the parent, and this video will be the child of it. So CMI5's activity ID will be the parent ID of all these statements.
Yeah, I'm looking at the spec now. That sounds right. I must be wrong. We're probably saving it somewhere else, but I'm not sure where, and I have to go back in my statements to go look.
So we could use the first UUID of that is generated by the initialized verb. We could use that as the session ID, but the best would be to add it to somewhere else, maybe in the meta, just like it is done by the CMI5. So I think it is using meta category for category, or I'll have to see where they are using it. Yeah, it is using the ID session ID in the extensions of the context extensions. Hello.
So it sounds to me like the overall agreement is to punt this as well, but to leave it in there is optional. What it sounds like.
I'm sorry, I had lost
I
my
would
audio.
I would second that motion for leaving it as an optional.
I would third it.
So this is how the CMI5 is implementing session ID. So even if we make it optional, we would have to tell how it is added and what should be the value of the ID. So one way would be to use a similar way, change the ID, this part. So it would be related to video. So it will be something like xAPI video context extensions session ID, and we could tell that the value would be the UUID of the first statement.
Yeah, I mean that
But
sounds
I
reasonable
guess
to me. I'm not very familiar with the AU requirements, but that looks like it looks appropriate to me.
I guess the one key difference maybe here is where it's being stored. I know the session ID has kind of been bouncing around a little bit, so right now it's in extensions. That may or may not stay there, depending on how things work out.
Do you mean for the CMI5 it is not fixed?
That's right, yeah. I think it just recently went into extensions, like within the last month or so. And
Okay.
before that, I believe it was stored somewhere else. I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly where though.
I thought it was in category, but today I'm seeing it in extensions. So maybe it was in category.
I know it's bounced around a little bit, so it may or may not stay there. I don't know if that matters though.
Okay. So what do we suggest we should do with it? So is it okay to for now to make it put it in the result with the context extensions?
Yeah, I mean that seems fine to me. Context statement property is supposed to be bigger than that, right? This the other statement considered as context for this statement that's supposed to be more about something bigger than just the concept of what we're talking about here for a session ID. Is that right?
I didn't get your question.
So in the xAPI spec under context, there's a property called statement that's supposed to be another statement that connects multiple statements together, right? So John read the book, John attended the class might be two related statements that I think you would use that property to connect. it sounds like that's kind of similar to what we were talking about
No.
for the session ID, but I'm not sure of the intent of that. So if that's not what that's for, or it's supposed to be a larger revision, then putting it in extensions seems appropriate.
Yeah, when it is a statement, it would be the entire context of the thing. In our case, the context is the video itself. So the context will be the video, and the ID. Sorry, I'm also confused. Anyway, so let's assume that we'll keep it in extensions. Should I call it optional? Okay, I've written it optional, fine. And should we call that the value should be the first? We'll have to write this explanation somewhere. So for now, I'll write it here. Should I say that value will be same as the UUID?
I mean, that's what we do. I think that's just because it made the most sense at the time when we were trying to initially do this, but I'm totally up to suggestions for alternatives.
This could be one way to remove confusion. Apart from that, it could be any random value. I'll take silence as an agreement. Okay, so we are almost at the end of the hour. Let's end it today, and we'll meet next time. Next month, it is on April 5th. Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Thank you for coordinating.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Yeah.